My team, in this paper, I will analyze Lee McIntyre's book, Post-Truth, as well as to discuss the post-truth development from science denial through the increase of fake news. So, after the 2016 United States presidential election, Oxford Dictionaries declared post-truth word of the year for 2016 and describe it as a relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. So post-truth is away from being a new phenomenon, yet in the last century we witnessed all kinds of science denial about climate change, vaccines, flat earth, and other disturbing warning signs. There are largely fact-free campaign over Brexit in Great Britain, where hundreds of buses advertising the bogus statistic that the UK was sending 350 million euros a week to the European Union, and the growing campaign. Okay. Нещо се говорило, не виждам. Се така. Добре. The growing and disinformation campaigns by political against their own people in Hungary, Russia, and Turkey. Many see post-truth as a part of growing international trend, where some try to bend reality to fit their opinions rather than other way around. This is not necessarily a campaign to say that facts do not matter, but instead a conviction that facts can always be shared, selected, and presented with a political context that favors one interpretation of truth over another. So the concept of truth in philosophy goes all the way back to Plato, who warned through Socrates of the danger of false claims of knowledge. Socrates felt if one is ignorant, one can be taught. The great threat comes from those who have the hubris to think that they already know the truth, for then one might be impetuous enough to act on a falsehood. Naturally, philosophers have fought for centuries over whether this sort of correspondence view is correct, whereby we judge the truth of statement only by how well it fits our reality. Other prominent conceptions of truth reflect a diversity of opinion among philosophers about the proper theory of truth, even while as a value there seems a little dispute that truth is important. For now, however, the question at hand is not whether we have the proper theory of truth, but how to make sense of the different ways that people subvert truth. As a first step, it is important to acknowledge that we sometimes make mistakes and say things that are untrue without meaning to do so. In that case, one is uttering a falsehood as opposed to a lie, for the mistake is not intentional. The next step beyond this is willful ignorance, which is when we do not really know whether something is true, but we say it anyway without bothering to take the time to find out whether our information is correct. In this case, we might blame the speaker for his or her laziness, for if the facts are easily available, the person who states a falsehood seems at least partially responsible for any ignorance. Next comes lying, when we tell a falsehood with intent to deceive. This is an important milestone, for we have here crossed over into attempting to deceive another person, even though we know that what we are saying is untrue. By definition, every lie has an audience. We may not feel responsible for uttering a falsehood if no one is listening, or if we are sure that no one will believe it. But when our intent is to manipulate someone into believing something that we know to be untrue, we have graduated from the mere interpretation of facts into their falsification. So in the purest form, post-truth is when one thinks that the crowd's reaction actually does change the facts about a lie. When an individual is misformed or mistaken, he or she will likely pay the price. But when our leaders or our society are in denial over the basic facts, the consequences can be world-shattering. When South African president claimed that drugs were part of the Western plot and the garlic and lemon juice could be used to treat AIDS, over 300,000 people died. When President Trump maintains that climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese government and economy, the long-term consequences may be equally devastating. Yet the real problem here is not merely the content of any particular belief, but the overarching idea that depending on what one wants to be true, some facts matter more than others. It is not simply that climate change deniers don't believe in facts, is that the only way to accept those facts that justify their ideology. Like all conspiracy theorists, they feel entitled to a double standard, whereby they simultaneously believe with no evidence that the world's climate scientists are part of a global conspiracy to hype the evidence on a climate change, but then to cherry pick the most favorable scientific statistics that allegedly show that the global temperature has not gone up in the last 2 decades. This is not the abandonment of the facts, but the corruption of the process by which facts are credibly gathered and reliably used to shape one's beliefs about reality. But this perspective can and should be challenged. Do we want to live in a world where policy is made based on how it makes us feel rather than how well it works in reality? At some point, scientists must admit that even their strongest explanation cannot be offered as a truth, but only strongly warranted belief based on justification given the evidence. This alleged weakness of scientific reasoning is often exploited by those who would claim that they are the real scientists. That if science is an open process, then it should not be in the business of excluding alternative theories. Until a theory is absolutely proven, they believe a competing theory could always be true. The phenomenon of science denial in general is relevant as a way to understand the phenomenon of post-truth. But to do that, we should probably start a little further back when science denial really started to heat up in the 1950s as tobacco companies realized that they had a vested interest in raising doubt over whether cigarette smoking caused lung cancer. Science denial can start from either an economic or ideological agenda. Most commonly, it is kicked off by those who have something to lose, and it's later carried on by those who get caught up in their campaign of misinformation. The story begins at the Plaza Hotel in New York City in 1953. The heads of the major tobacco companies came together to figure out what to do in light of a devastating scientific paper that had recently been published linking cigarette tar to a cancer in lab mice. The leader of the summit was John Hill, a legendary figure in public relations, who suggested that instead of continuing to fight among themselves over whose cigarettes were healthier, they needed an approach where they would fight the science by sponsoring additional research. The executives agreed to fund this under the Hill's newly created Tobacco Industry Research Committee, whose mission was to convince the public that there was no proof that cigarette smoking caused cancer, and that previous work show such a link was being questioned by numerous scientists. And it worked. Capitalizing on the idea that science had shown no conclusive link between cigarettes and cancer, they took out a full-page ad in numerous American newspapers, reaching 43 million people, which had the effect of creating confusion and doubt on a scientific question that was close to settled. The story continued over the next 4 decades until 1998, when the tobacco companies finally agreed to close the story as a part of a $200 billion settlement that shielded them from future lawsuits. They were then free to sell their products to a worldwide market who could be presumed to know the risks. As McIntyre explained, this strategy was successfully employed in later scientific disputes over nuclear winter, acid rain, the ozone hole, and the global warming. Some of the funding for these campaigns even came from the tobacco industry. By the time climate change became an issue in the early 2000s, the mechanism of the corporate-funded science denial was a well-oiled machine. Paid experts produced fake research that was converted into talking points and memes, then repeated on television, and paid shields and spread through social media, and when necessary, hammered into public through paid advertising campaigns. Why search for scientific disagreement when it cannot be manufactured? One of the deepest roots of the post-truth have also been with us for the longest time, so that's cognitive bias. Psychologists for decades have been performing experiments that show that we are not quite as rational as we think. Some of this work bears directly on how we react in the face of unexpected truth. A central concept of human psychology is that we strive to avoid psychic discomfort. It just feels better for us to think that we are smart, well-informed, capable people, that we are not. What happens when we are confronted with information that suggests that something we believe is untrue? It creates psychological tension. When we feel psychic discomfort, we are motivated to find a non-ego threatening way to reduce it, which can lead to the irrational tendency to accommodate our beliefs to our feelings rather than the other way around. The rise of social media as a source of news blurred the lines even further between news and option, as people shared stories from blogs, alternative news sites, as if they were all true. Without knowing what are they doing, people could feed their desire for confirmation bias, not to mention scores on free news content, directly without bothering to patronize traditional news sources. The result is well-known problem of news silos that feed polarization and fragmentation in media content. If we get our news from social media, we can tune out those sources we don't like. The internet, which allows for immediate access to reliable information by anyone who bothers to look for it, has become nothing but an echo chamber. With no form of editorial control over what is now sometimes presented as news, how can we know when we are being manipulated? So post-truth is not about reality, it's about the way that humans react to reality. Once we are aware of our cognitive biases, we are in a better position to subvert them. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we are moving to questions.
I can add something to this presentation. The concept of post-truth is in fact not new. It's already known in the history for thousands of years. And there is also a Latin proverb who says in Latin, calumniatur semper aliquid acer. That means lie and keep lying because always something will stick to or stay. And this concept is already from Plutarch, from many Greek philosophers. But today we challenge and face up technology who comes to anyone, and not educated people are our problem, in fact, with not critical mind, who will, in fact, diminish effects of lies. So truth, or what is not what truth, is in fact something we need to assess by ourselves. And this is only education which gives us a weapon against that, not any laws, because it's not possible. University of Zagreb faces last 4 years some agenda. Every day they start to lie about me, about my politics and so on, but it doesn't matter because university stand alone and it doesn't harm, how to say, but some political agenda, I need to say ultra leftist political agenda fight against promoting European human values. That means promoting helping ourselves, promoting living with the truth, promoting, how to say, to obey human values. That means we can call it biblical values, we call it Christian values, but in fact there are also Jewish values and also human and European values. But there are new agenda in the world where we have and we face with denial of family, denial of parental relations. That means children with their fathers and so on. And that I face, for example, our students, very small, tiny part of our students at the university, start talking against me without, how to say, accepting that I am not only lecturer but also professor with a tenure. They will come to me and we need to respect, in fact, this authority. And we call this phenomenon destrolution. That means destrolution. That means destruction of institutions, authorities, and values. We can call it in many ways, but I think that we need in Europe promote in education to raise responsible citizens these values. If we don't, what can we expect from the society? This is the problem. Of course, technology is the problem because it reaches everyone and every eye reaches everyone. And only tiny part of society, layers of society, can critically assess and see what is true and what is not. Or even at least to put it in a way and doubt for everything. So you need not to accept every statement as true. You need to critically go over it. So that is a problem. How we will resolve it, it's not easy to say, but education is one of the ways.
Dr. Philippe?
Yes, it isn't a question, it's a commentary to what you present. Thank you for your communication. Yes, of course, there is a double issue for us in Europe. At first, as you say, the problem of the willing to develop media literacy, information literacy, and also there is a gap among citizens, among those who can pay for information and quality journalism, and those who cannot pay, and so they just consume free information. And among these free information, there are a lot of not bad, very bad quality information. So there is an ideological maybe challenge, and also an economic challenge to provide maybe a free information for everybody. And so we were quite surprised in a previous conference in Lisbon. We have discussed with a colleague, American colleague, who fights for free information in United States as a public public, sorry, something which is public, which is free and public, because we need it for democracy. And according to an American, it's quite curious, because we can consider that in Europe we are more for public and free goods compared to American. But maybe it's one solution. Well, we don't know, but it's a double challenge for us. Thank you.